Right, so do you remember seeing this image during the lecture? There very briefly. So most of you voted for this one. Can someone tell me what we see here? Yes?
It's the New York Downtown Athletic Club from the New York in Queens, where basically it's a sports club for single men, where every floor is connected with a different sports facility in a way. And this creates this kind of culture of congestion.
Yeah. And is this seen as something positive in delivery snooter?
Yes,
I think
yes, 100%. It represents the whole atmosphere of connecting different uses in New York and how this gives this metropolitan condition.
Yeah. And in addition to that, I think it's very enclosed. So part of it's something you only realize when you make a cross section across the tower. Because from outside, all these buildings, they look the same. They are like mirrors, and not much of it can be felt in the public space. So these Manhattan towers really have the capacity to. You talked about one club, but you could have housing, shops. So it's really a combination of all possible functions, and therefore contributing to this culture of congestion, the metropolitan, cosmopolitan character. A few voted for this. Do you remember seeing this and when? Yes?
House notes house.
Yes? And what do we see here?
So, residence houses, residential.
And where would you like to live? On which floor? None. Oh, okay. I would be very happy here. Lazy life, big high ceilings, a nice view. So basically, so you see, it was also kind of a social stratification, with the bourgeois having the living on the bel étage, the nice floor, and the higher you go, the more crowded it is, lower ceiling, and in many cases there were the domestics working for the richer people here. But the advantage, if we could see this positively, is that at least if the different social classes would live in the same building, and therefore you would not have this segregation per neighborhood. And this one, you remember, how is it called? Who made it? Who made this drawing? No, that was Hilbert-Simon. And in fact, it was also a reaction to Le Corbusier. So Le Corbusier made his model for 3 million inhabitants. And Hilbert-Simon made a calculation, and for instance, noticed that it was too dense for the green space. So if you look at the drawing from Le Corbusier, it looked very generous in terms of open space and built up a ratio. But he could notice that it was, if you just imagine all the people on the green field, it would be not sufficient. And another thing he criticized from Le Corbusier was the separation of functions, including the commuting. So the proposal here is to have a vertical zoning with all the productive functions in a sort of basement, so like 5 floors, including transportation, underground public transport, a pedestrian platform, and from there the residential functions. And he explicitly suggested that you would just have to take the elevator from home to work and back. But he, at some point, he was young when he did this, and after when he got older, he was himself critical, looking at it, thinking, observing that it was too abstract, too monolithic. But at least he introduced this idea of vertical organization of functions. All right, next one is which development model is the most pedestrian friendly? These are 3 schemes we saw. I think you have to also pick one you think is the most pedestrian friendly. Right, so see mainly these two. Who wants to tell me the name or when were they conceived, these two models? Yes?
I choose the second picture, it's the neighborhood unit of Larry's.
Mm-hmm.
I choose it because I remember in his planning, it consists around the services and all the functions in the radius of 15 meters.
And do you have any idea about this one? Do you remember seeing it? No? Who voted for this one? Yes? Do you remember what's the name?
Rad something.
Bradburn. Yes.
Yes.
So what's the difference between these two? Why did you choose the one on the right instead of the one in the middle?
The right one is almost like a super block where the exterior is more focused on vehicular, but it also has cul-de-sacs in the middle which does not seem very good.
Okay.
I think that's the difference.
So this one, you're correct. So in both cases, it's really the idea of the neighborhood to organize everything within a walking distance. So the neighborhood unit, as you said, is having a collective facility like a school at the heart of the neighborhood. But the way this one, the Hardburn model, is one step further is that it really organizes the whole block around a continuous car-free space. So you have a kind of backyard garden that is collective, and now it's hidden. Here, the school will be part of it. So that means that wherever you live, your kid could go to school in a very safe way, and also they are interconnected across the different blocks. So this is a model that was invented in the US, but not often implemented in the US, but it was very much used in the new towns that were developed in the UK in the post-war period. And interestingly, the three models were invented almost at the same time, in the mid-1920s. You remember this one? 7V, yes. So 7 speeds or 7 ways. So it's very based on a hierarchy of different speeds, down to really the pedestrian level. But as you see, it's confined within a block. It's very difficult to move from one block to another because you have to cross these big highways. And that's for instance, the model that was implemented in Chandigarh in India. Okay, so now we move to the post-war period, the 40s, 50s, where we had a big need for housing, and the different countries responded to that in different ways. In the UK, there was this whole wave of new towns that would implement these modernist principles. And in France, we had the ZUP, so the zone to urbanize in priority. And the question is, rank the main differences between the UK new towns and the mass housing projects in France. So what are the main things they differ? Why do they?
Can I ask a question about it? Is it from the most different to the most the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they have many things in common, but yeah, so you rank and these numbers are not, don't look at this is not the ranking, this is just a list. So you will reorganize these different aspects. more or less done. Yeah, so we see, I'm not sure you all agree with this, but at least we see quite linear distribution. So most of you think the density is the biggest difference, the main difference. Who wants to comment on this? Yes?
Because UK towns have like really low density. This was a big uptick from Vietnam.
So UK was too long, you said. Indeed, you had Kulin, the idea of townscape was starting from the observation that these new towns were too low, too little people, too few people to really have this sense of urbanity. And do you think the French case was too dense?
Yes,
High density. The density is one thing, and then in fact also more the typology. So that's the second part is very vertical high-rise building, because I think you could reach similar density with another housing type, which would be not that high-rise and more continuous. But there was clearly a choice here to implement the modernist, Le Corbusier type of vision of apartment buildings, a shared collective space on the ground. The mix of functions. Who do you think the UK towns were doing better?
I think not, because in the UK towns also they had a little bit of functional zoning. I think in France is the UP also it is functional zoning. I think there's a similarity there rather than a difference.
Yes, yeah. But in fact, this scheme here is part of there's a book saying the new town is the response to the megalopolis, and it's almost a handbook of how do you make a new town, and you clearly see how so you have the town and then a number of neighborhoods. Each neighborhood had to be to some extent also self-sufficient in terms of facilities, having its own school, its own little shop, and then you see a connection to the industry. And all these neighborhoods would be connected to the very efficient transportation system, road system, but separate from the pedestrian and cyclist. So this is more or less the link to public transport. That was also an important focus when planning the new towns. They were always around existing or new train stations, as often satellite of bigger cities. All right. Again, feel free to comment. Yes. So we move to the paper. So we use paper because I would like you to sketch. And again, try to do it just out of memory. No need to look at your screen. And the first question here is to sketch the plans of, on the one hand, Barcelona. So the extension plan by Cerda in 18 something. And next to it, the plan of Brasilia. If you can compare it at the same scale, would be fantastic. And then try to compare at least 3 main differences and at least 1 similarity. And let's try to do this in 4 minutes. teams, those who are ready, it would be very nice to come and sketch it very quickly here on the board, and just to have a support for this guys. You want to come? Question 8. You can start. Right, so can you maybe explain 3 differences between the two? And one similarity?
Yeah, I was doing the square that I've created here. Here you have the line where the important buildings from the apartment are situated, and this is like all the building towers.
So can I ask who had a similar kind of drawing? Yes. Because are they at the same scale? You really zoom on the block. You remember how big is the block in this extension plan? Meters? Somebody? Around 50, 60?
Yeah.
No, I have in mind 80, but maybe you're right. I think we should double check. And these blocks, we remember, much bigger. They are 300 by 300.
Yeah.
So they are 10 times bigger than the green in Barcelona. So that's maybe one first difference, is the scale, which makes Barcelona very permeable and nice to walk through. And do you remember what has this, that the corners are cut? Square, yeah, that's now they can make a square with this new regulation to limit traffic. But originally it was for tram system, so the truck can easily turn. What other differences did you notice?
Scale, the human scale, like the Barcelona was more adapted to a human scale and replicated the idea of street in a different scale than the traditional tissue, but it was still the idea of street. In Brazil, it was more the idea of building in a carpet.
Scale, yes?
Maybe relates to that, but Barcelona is more the perimeter block kind of property with houses all the way through that covers the whole block's footprint,
Yeah.
whereas Brasilia has one of these standalone icons and on these fields of open green.
So that's correct. So you have what is called the monumental axis with all the institutional buildings. By the way, end up on the waterfront here, artificial lake, which this is something common. Barcelona and Brasilia have a waterfront, but they do have, in fact, an interesting block. So this, again, I forgot the name. It's a 300 by 300 housing block, which is quite really defined as in its perimeter. But that it's not touching the ground, so it's open. The ground floor is open, but it still has a sense of gives a sense of enclosure. But of course, it's a completely different scale. And this has been also completely built up in the Nouvelle. It was designed to have only 2 sides built in the original plan, and very soon it became completely built, even inside, and it went much higher. I think now that the current density is about 6 to 8 times bigger than what was originally planned. And some common things between the two. Did you all work, draw church Barcelona at that scale, or did I saw some other plans a bit more?
The similarities I think between the two is they both have this tabula rasa approach. There's no, I mean, Brazilian is not from scratch, but also in Barcelona they made this way that has no historical reference.
Yeah. Tabula rasa, it was an extension. So tabula rasa suggests that you destroy something that was there before.
Yes.
And the nice thing about Barcelona, it's a grid, sort of carpet, but it included the existing villages. There was Gracia, Poblenou, so the plan really improves, integrates this. So they didn't destroy, the plan of Barcelona didn't destroy the pre-existing villages. So, no. That's why in Barcelona you have some neighborhoods which are quite nice because they are smaller scale, narrow streets because they were originally villages. They want to use this
One more similarity I think is that they are expandable as well. I think we can grow organically.
Yeah. This one has such a fixed form. It's very much also aiming to have a symbolic value of a bird, or it looks more like a plane, by the way, but it's the idea was to symbolize a bird. Yeah, you could extend it, but it's also limited because of the fixed shape it supposes to refer to. Maybe a handplate could extend endlessly. And maybe one common thing is that in Barcelona you do have this grid, but you have the diagonal, which are 2 or 3 or 4 avenues that really connect important points and have this axial structure that you find here. You have 2 main axes in Barcelona keyboard, but that's a common. They're quite very different, but there are a few common things. Thank you for your join. Yeah, I propose we have a little break, 5 minutes break, and then we'll move to the next quiz question.